those processing capabilities that you have to remove from your basic account. Wow.
Dial-in by phone removed?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Technologically challenged. I
So
admit it.
You don't see any of us?
Well, I see you across the top. Oh, and I see you I see you now. You're in the speaker view.
Okay.
I guess maybe I'm not supposed to see myself.
No, you're fine. So you're in speaker view. So if you go up to the top right-hand corner and click on that button, there's different ways that you can see, so you can play with how you want to see us.
Oh, okay.
We see you fine, Kathy.
Okay, well, aren't you lucky?
Okay, great. Kelly? Laura? Laura?
Hi.
There she is. Okay.
Hi. So good news, people are still getting married. People are still looking to the future, and they're still saying that weddings shall go on. So that is good news.
Good. Lori? Michaela?
Good morning. My good news is I have made it back to the States safely, and I'm not stuck in Panama and not sick, hopefully.
Yay.
Not yet.
Mike?
I assume that's me. The good news is my wife was on a 2-day business trip to Chicago, and she came back, which is always nice, but she also brought candy and popcorn. Woohoo!
What kind's your favorite?
I like chocolate, so
Okay.
the chocolate candies are good, but she brought a bunch of hard candies for my kiddos, for our kiddos, and they were already like throwing down on the sugar this morning.
Nothing like candy for breakfast. Naomi?
Yeah, I guess 2 things. I'm happy to be with you all. I thought I wasn't going to make the task force meeting, that an event I was supposed to be at was postponed, so I'm here. And then fingers crossed, if the mountain resorts don't close, I'm going to go up to the mountains Friday night with some girlfriends for our birthday and go skiing at Copper on Saturday. I'm excited just to get away for a little bit.
Yeah. Patty?
My good news is because of cancellation of meetings, I've walked more this week than I have in the past.
You're just turning lemons into lemonade, aren't you, Patty?
Yes, indeed. As long as the weather's nice.
That's right. Rhiannon?
My good news is my dog got spayed earlier this week, and she is happy and healthy.
Oh, that's good.
And is not going to have any puppies.
Okay, good. I was wondering where we were going with that. Sam? Oh, Sam, are you with us?
I'm with you.
There we are.
My good news, same as everybody else's, now that I don't have to travel, I've gotten lots of great family time with the kids and my wife, so I've enjoyed it. Silver lining.
Silver linings. Sebastian?
Yeah, I just heard back from I've only heard back from 2 colleges, and those first 2 colleges so far are DU and CU, and I'm in, and I got some money to go. So
yay! Congratulations. That's awesome. Thomas is not, no, Thomas?
Yep. Let's see. Checking off my bucket list of seeing a concert at the Stanley Hotel this weekend. And then silver lining is air pollution around the world is very low right now.
Yes. Peep, I'm so sorry I skipped over the P's. My apologies.
Yeah, sure. So my good news starts with a panic attack that I had yesterday because my parents are both over 80. They're in an independent living facility in DC, and turns out they went to the church where the pastor has coronavirus. I was trying to determine, did they go on the day where, we're supposed to pay attention and self-isolate, and turns out they did. So we went through the whole rigmarole yesterday of how to self-isolate, and actually they only have 3 days left, before March 14th. This happened on March 1st. And I know they're doing fine because they're being really argumentative about legislation. So that's good news, I think. And I would also agree, I think it's fascinating. It's going to be interesting to see how air pollution is impacted by people just not moving around as much. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's see where Tyler is sick. So Tyler is not joining us today. And then Veronica.
Yes. So my good news is like everyone in my house is healthy. We were, had a good game of tag over the weekend, a family game of tag, which was awesome. And then I had a great meeting in the box with some high school students yesterday.
Oh, that's great.
And I believe Eugene joined us and maybe some others.
Oh, should we go back there? Anybody not go that I missed or join late?
Oh, hi, Stacy Gilmore. I joined a little late.
Hi, Stacy.
Hi.
Anyone else on the task force not get to give good news?
It's Eugene. I discovered that Alexa plays music of all kinds. And so though I'm working at home, I feel all right. I got some music here.
Nice. Liz, did you want to give some good news?
Sure. My good news is on Monday next week, our new executive director for the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency starts. Her name is Grace Rink, and the team is really, really excited to welcome her to Denver.
Great. Anyone else? Sonrisa, I don't think was able to join today.
This is Jessica.
Jessica.
Hi. Yeah, my good news is along with everyone else, I'll be spending a lot of quality time at home and plant my spring garden this weekend, which will be really nice.
Very nice. Anyone else I missed? Okay. I guess I should go and then Jacob, I'll turn it over to you. Does that sound right?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. My good news is that I think before the end of the meeting, I might sneak upstairs and grab potato chip and show you potato and chip today so you can actually see the guinea pigs I've been talking about. So I might disappear in the last 5 minutes of the meeting and go get them for you. You'll actually get to meet them.
Frank, was that you? Colfax
those
did.
people that we're recruiting for that
Yes.
are the time that we can
Kathy,
tap into for
Kathy, could you put yourself on mute?
flyering, like when a meeting
Oh, no.
is coming up, and we just want to get
We can put
flyers
her on
out
mute.
and make sure that everybody knows the meeting is
Frank is on.
Frank, would you share good news?
as opposed to
I got on Zoom. I think that's the best thing so far.
kind of a light version of more detailed
Can you-
content. To me, that feels like
I'm trying to figure out
the least desirable option because
So there we go.
Got it.
Thank you.
No
All
problem.
right, so I'm going to share the screen now. If you cannot see, let me know, but hopefully this is big enough for everybody. And I will hide that. Can everybody see the agenda? Okay, I got a thumbs up from Liz. Just know that we can't read all of body language because there's sufficient number of people that the tile on my screen doesn't work. So Marisol is going to be helping track raised hands. So for those of you who didn't join early, if you click on participants at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a right bar with everybody join. And on the bottom of that, there's a raise hand option. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions and are looking for the best opportunity to go there. So we'll use that throughout. And then just like Marisol did throughout, we will want to go through and check in with everyone as much as possible. So today for our truncated meeting, the agenda that we're going to go through, we're doing welcome and purpose and good news. There will clearly be at the end some discussion about what the path forward is, and not only with coronavirus, but also how we're using that with meetings in a box and other things. And the bulk of today, we'll spend the next hour thinking through the great work that many of you did on reworking the long-term outcomes. For those of you who are not able to look on the screen, I did send a PDF this morning with both the updated agenda and all the long-term outcomes, the draft long-term outcomes for us to work through and edit as we move forward. So you should be able to have that if you have access to be able to do that. Any questions? Marisol, anything I missed there? Okay, I do see Marisol's head shake no, so that's good.
No, sorry.
It's okay.
I'm monitoring for hands raised, so.
Good, thank you. All right, so the way we're going to do this is 4 groups met over the course of the last few days and had really great discussions. Everyone went about an hour, 10 or 15 minutes, and worked through getting these long-term outcomes into shape. And a person for each has agreed to report out, so we'll turn it over to that person, and then they'll do the report out, and then we'll discuss it, amend it as needed. We have 4 of these, so let's keep the report outs to just a couple minutes each and then save room. We will do an initial pass of agreement, probably with hand raises, mean you agree, as task force members. And then if we need to refine things because there's some interaction to them, then we can call that out and come back to that. Does that make sense? I'm seeing a little nod from Thomas, and the only other person I can see is Frank. So any questions?
No.
Any hand raises, Marisol?
Not that I can see. And Jacob, you can scroll. You should have the bar across the top of your screen, and there's a blue arrow. You should be able to scroll through everybody if you need to.
Yep, I see this.
And this is,
go ahead.
This is Kelly. I'm here. I just don't have video yet, but I will shortly.
Okay, hi Kelly.
Great, welcome Kelly.
Hi.
Okay, great. So Thomas, do you want to go through our mitigation?
Sure. So we built this out a little bit more than what we had finished up with on last week, and tried to set some fairly aggressive goals to keep us in line to reaching that 2040 goal of Denver being greenhouse gas emission free. But we also added, beginning in 2020, Denver prioritized mitigation solutions that also reduce other harmful air pollutants, especially in communities with poor air quality. Just an FYI, the city does not regulate emissions, so it is a state, the state does that. So really where we're looking there is for Denver to be an advocate at the state level to reduce emissions. And then looking at a consumption-based inventory. Right now, the city doesn't have a lot of good data around this. So by 2022, Denver conducts a consumption-based inventory to support development of Scope 3 emission strategies. And then with buildings, we did by 2025, incentives are in place and effective, ensuring that 50% of new buildings are net zero. By 2030, all new buildings are net zero. And by 2040, all homes and buildings have zero greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation, by 2025, 50% of new vehicle registrations are electric, and the city has infrastructure in place. By 2025, the frequency, reliability, and affordability of bus routes are improved by, and we need to set a percentage there. Kind of had a little trouble of figuring out how to measure that. By 2030, 50% of single occupancy vehicles.
Sorry.
Yeah, basically this is a reduction in single occupancy vehicle trips, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And that's to just get more people walking, biking, and using public transit. By 2030, 100% of new vehicle registrations are electric and affordable for all Denver residents who are reputably available on the market. By 2040 or sooner, our transportation system is affordable, convenient, and emissions free. Adaptation and resiliency.
No, we don't need to go there.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yep.
Let's pause with mitigation get questions, clarifying questions first on the table, so we can talk through those. So right now, let's try folks chiming in if they have questions or hand raises. I see Patty, the hand raise. We'll call on you, but let's use the hand raise on the participant. Okay, go ahead, Patty.
Yeah, I just had a clarification question on the development of Scope 3 emissions strategies. Is this, if this is intended for public, could that be just explained with an asterisk?
Yeah, so Scope 3 emissions are those emissions that we have from the products that we purchase that are basically coming in from outside of the city. This is a really complicated thing, but I think that this is a direction that a lot of people are starting to look. But essentially what this would eventually end up doing is give preference to local products. It would reduce, ultimately you try to reduce transportation, the transport of materials, products that are very energy intensive products to make. I think that's really kind of the basis of it.
That's fine.
Does that make, okay.
As long as it's in the document that there's a definition at the bottom or whatever, reference.
Great. Other clarifying questions?
Do you see Frank has his hand raised?
Frank, go ahead.
Two questions. One, the 2020, the very first one on buildings, 2025, 50%. And does that also mean that new buildings, 50% of new buildings are net zero by 2025, or just that the incentives are in place?
That the new buildings that are going up at that time are to be net zero.
Okay, got 50% of all new buildings going up at, excuse me, at 2025 are net zero.
And my understanding is the way that this was designed is essentially we're going to work through incentives first to encourage more buildings, and then, you know, moving forward, it'll probably move to things beyond incentives, more requirements.
And then my quick second question was on in transportation now by 2025, 50% of new vehicle registrations are electric with infrastructure in place. I guess I just, like, where did that come from and how realistic is that? I don't know what the churn of new vehicle purchases are.
Yeah, so we were looking at the city's goals, and I think it's from the 80 by 50 plan. Let me pull that up real quick. They had a goal of, what was it? Sorry, should have had this up.
And Liz may know off the top of her head.
It's 15% by 2025 of all vehicles in the city to be electric by 2025. That's our 80 by 50 goal.
Yep, and then while we were in the meeting, we were trying to figure out, like last year, what percent of new vehicles that were purchased in 2019 were electric. Statewide, Mike, it was what, 4%?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we don't have Denver specific numbers, but statewide, of all the vehicles purchased last year, 4% of them were electric.
And Denver has generally tracked higher than the state. So we're probably somewhere between 4 and 5% in 2019 of new vehicle sales being electric.
Frank, any other clarifying questions, or should I move on to the next person?
Oh, yeah, please move on.
Okay, John.
Did you say John or George?
John, I'm sorry. John had his hands raised. George, you also have your hand raised. Give me just a minute.
Okay.
Okay, John, we'll come back to you. Oh, you, okay. Peep?
Yeah. So just looking at the transportation pieces and some of these, and I remember them from last week, or they got developed this week in the small groups. So E and A look nice and strong. I'm kind of questioning D with respect to equity. I don't know that we can expect that 100% of the people buying cars are going to go EV. Some people just can't buy a car. They're going to need to be on the bus or riding a bike. And I might suggest for B that we consider the metric here that the frequency, reliability, and affordability of bus routes are improved as evidenced by X% of people using transit, which then we can tie to city goals that we've already established.
I like that.
Do you have a suggestion, Pete?
I was just looking, and I will find, we do have goals. You can find it in the Mixed Mobility Action Plan. Basically, it is sort of a sub-goal. It's taking the single occupancy vehicle trips from our current 73% to 50%. The sub-goals include how many people they're hoping to see walk and bike. I think that's 15%, and there is a transit number. Just don't know what that is right now.
So we'll look that up.
I mean, I see that we're being nice and assertive about electric vehicles. I want to be sure we're just as assertive about transit, which actually gets people not using cars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Were we trying to go to John, Marisol?
Yes, John. We have a lot of hands raised, just so you know, Jacob. So
yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, now I can see I think I figured out how to get the participant list up while
You're
I'm
fine,
sharing.
no problem. I got it. I got you. John, go ahead.
Okay, Thomas, I had a question about the buildings. The first two points were on just focused on new buildings. And then it looks like by 2040, it's all buildings. And I just wanted to clarify that 2040 was all existing buildings as well, or is that also focused on new buildings?
You're correct. So we're expecting 2030 is going to be just the new buildings, but by 2040 we'll have all buildings to be zero emissions.
Great. And did you all talk about any interim steps rather than jumping 20 years? Is there anything between now and then that we can set as far as goals for how to start retrofitting existing buildings?
So I think the conversation is that, you know, the difficulty of the existing buildings, we were having a hard time coming up with what interim goals should be for there. So I'd defer to you and what you think would be good goals to set there.
Well, it might be helpful to set a goal by 2025 to have a plan, because there's going to be a whole variety of different solutions. And so it's almost like an inventory of types of issues that we're going to face. If it's a 150-year-old building, it will be a different type of retrofit than if it's a 15-year-old building. And so I think it's almost like inventorying the types of buildings and then the types of renovations or retrofits that are going to be needed, and then coming up with the strategy on how to attack each of those. And then that would give us 15 years then to basically implement that and get it into practice.
Jacob, there's been a request if you could change your settings so that people are seeing what changes you're making instead of it just being.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. No problem. Sorry, John and Thomas, was there anything more?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Veronica? Yeah, I was going to mention the same thing about the older buildings, and then I think also staying in line with equity, like make sure that inventory includes those vulnerable communities, because that's really where they're going to need a lot of support. And then jumping down to transportation, kind of again going what we have already on the roads. I don't see I'm not seeing anything about like, what do we do with the existing gas vehicles we have now? Like, is there a percentage that we want to drop that throughout the years? Like, 50% of gas vehicle, like by 20 something, there will be a drop of gas vehicles on the road, because just because you buy an electric car doesn't necessarily mean you get rid of your big, pickup truck that guzzles gas, So how do we get those, not necessarily put more vehicles on the road, but actually get some of those off? And what's that percentage of
really
trying to
tough
get those?
Denver, just because we have so many surrounding communities and tourism, that putting a number to that is going to be really difficult.
Yeah, but I was just thinking, I think that's something we should try to get a percentage of bringing those gas vehicles down, and not just focusing on those electric vehicles.
So let's get all the issues on the table and then we can discuss. Is that okay, Thomas? So it looks like George, you're next in line.
Okay.
Is that not true, Marisol?
No,
Sorry.
so some people can't raise their hand, so I'm kind of monitoring private chats but it's okay. Let's let George go, and then Sam, you'll be next.
Sounds good.
Okay, Jacob, if you could go take your screen up. Right there. The code benefits and equity. Could you, someone explain why that, why you decide to include that, and also why equity seems to be tied? That's not what we talked about equity being when we had our initial training some, 3-4 a month ago. And that was more, it was more pointed. It was communities of color and communities with poor air quality. I don't know if you can even separate that out. I mean, all over Denver we have communities with poor air quality. So could you say something about that? Because I'm thinking some communities are actually more vulnerable when they have poor air quality, and they should be called out in that way.
Mm. So Thomas and the others who were on this
I would
call,
just say that I mean, I agree with, I mean, I think when you're looking at equity, you don't just look at color.
You don't. You could look at low income also.
Right, exactly. And that's the direction that we were going here with this. Most of the areas that we're going to find that have poor air quality are going to be lower income. And that's also due to, those are the communities where we're putting high emission companies in the area. And that's kind of where we were looking at that. But, we wanted to make sure that, it's not just greenhouse gases that are affecting these communities. It's all of the others as well that aren't considered greenhouse gases.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that both of those perspectives. I just argue for, let's be explicit about the communities we're talking about.
Sure. So
yeah, I agree. I think the main piece that was trying to be captured there, and I think we didn't get it at the end where we just said poor air quality. I think you're right, George. We need to be more explicit about which communities. But the main piece I think that we were trying to get at there was capturing, because there was the conversation about harmful emissions. So obviously CO2, just directly being exposed to CO2 doesn't harm you. It's really the indirect impacts from climate change. And so when we're limiting greenhouse gases, obviously there's benefits that are more indirect. But if we look at strategies that actually reduce other pollutants like particulate matter or benzene or whatever it might be, where there's real co-benefits, then that's where we can have a more direct impact on health and more direct community benefits. So I think that was the nugget of what we were trying to capture, but we didn't quite get all of the pieces in there. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll come back to that and talk through the edits. Marisol, who's next?
Sam? Sam? Okay, Sam, we're going to come back to you. Mike?
So I just want to +1 PIPs edit. I think that's a really good idea. I'm not sure that we need to focus on getting clunkers off. People don't own massive amounts of vehicles. I'm just not sure that's a high priority. But what I wanted to focus in on was the requirement of transportation 50% with all electric infrastructure in place. I don't know if we've got other folks who are familiar with how that process is going, but I think there's a PUC required docket for electrification of vehicles from Excel, and I don't even think it's started yet. And so it may take a couple of years to get that done. I know bureaucracy sucks, but that's the way it works. So we may not even have the authority for Excel to invest in infrastructure, maybe till say 2022. And then I do wonder how fast they can legitimately roll it out. I of course would love for them to roll out all this necessary infrastructure in 3 years, but that may be something outside of our control within the city and county of Denver. Especially because probably what will happen is the city and county of Denver, along with myself, may be intervening. Some of the other folks on the call may be intervening. So there's a PUC process question here that I'm not sure will align with our 2025 goals.
Can I just talk? So I think you're making an assumption that Excel is going to be the only one putting infrastructure out there. They're the only ones who are going to be controlled by the PUC. There's opportunities for many other companies and the city to build out that infrastructure.
So let's come back to talking through these. Let's get everything on the table first, and then we'll go through and adjust. Sound good? Anything else?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Marisol. We're getting used to how to facilitate in this virtual environment. So.
Liz, you've made a number of comments in the chat area, but and you also have your hand up. I didn't know if you also wanted to add.
No, I'm good. I found the number that people were looking for, so I put it in the chat box.
Okay.
On transit trips.
Oh, what is it?
15%. 15% of all trips will be by transit by 2030 is the mobility action.
And then another 15 by
biking and walking combined.
So that would be 30% total. Oh, sorry. That's not where we were looking.
Brandon?
We'll come back.
Brandon?
Mute. Okay. Is it when we're talking about says new vehicles? Are we talking about brand new vehicles, or new vehicle registrations? Like if I just moved to Denver, I am now new vehicle registration, or I bought a car that's a new. Are we talking about that or brand new vehicles?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about that. We didn't really hash that out, but I think when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about brand new vehicles.
Maybe Mike can chime in on the data. It probably is going to come down to a data question. I don't know if those numbers that I quoted earlier, about 4% of new sales in Denver is truly new sales or if it's new registrations. But in any case, sometimes that data is hard to come by. So it may not, we may just have to align that with the data that we can actually get, or it may not matter, that slight distinction very much. I mean, I think obviously having a vehicle that someone brings from somewhere else that's EV and they register in Denver is a positive thing, but probably something that we wouldn't be able to influence quite as much as maybe the new sales component.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Naomi?
Yes, two things. And Alana alluded to the clarification on the language around single occupancy vehicles. The way it's written in the mobility action plan, it says reduce single occupant vehicle commuters to 50%. And then I just wanted to throw it out there specific to the transit goal. Could we aim a little bit higher, knowing that we may not get there, but in trying to increase the number of people using transit by 25% versus 15%? I don't know if this has to be exactly aligned with the these goals, but that could be something that's aspirational for us to consider.
Sorry, would you say that one more time, Naomi?
Yes, so the first piece and it's being updated right now was just clarifying the language on single occupancy vehicle commuters.
Yep, I got that.
Okay, and then just looking at the percentage of people that we've outlined for using transit, could we go a little bit higher to maybe 25 or 20% if the group's comfortable?
Okay, great. So we'll have that discussion. Thank you, Naomi.
Great. And then our last hand up is Jessica and Sam, unless you have rejoined us. So Jessica and then Sam, if you're there.
Yeah, I was thinking that the first actually emissions reduction goal that we have for transportation is not till 2040, which is an emissions-free system. And I'm wondering if we should have 2025 and 2030 emissions reductions targets from the transportation sector, similar to what we have for the building sector. So we could offline some of that, but I think it's important to have those specific emission reductions numbers for these two major sectors laid out.
Great.
Okay, Sam's question has already been covered. Sonrisa, do you want to add something? I know that you're chatting.
Just a clarification on the point from Naomi on SOVs. I think it was to reduce the single occupancy vehicle for commuters to 50% instead of by. It actually makes a big difference.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
And
so go
Frank
ahead.
has just asked a question. Sorry, Jacob. He wants to
It's
know,
okay.
why is mitigation just about buildings and transportation?
Thomas?
There's definitely gaps there, Frank. I've been thinking about this on the outside. Yeah, there's all sorts of pieces, and those do need to be filled in. You know, I think realistically, if we sat and tried to fill everything in, we're talking about a day of talking. So I think there's lots of things that we need to add here.
And there's this overarching goal is someone just joined who pretty loud background noise. Overarching goal is trying to be a catch-all for everything. And so that's one way the group sort of was dealing with that, Frank. Not to say that there shouldn't be some specific other mitigation targets. I'm wondering, Liz, if you have anything you want to share on this.
Sure. So we do have the 100% renewable electricity goal by 2030, which is already very aggressive. I would not recommend changing that goal. So
get ready to go.
Well, it's in the 80 by 50. So we have.
Oh, I know, but didn't she?
Sorry, that's somebody else.
I'm trying to find who it is. Hold on. Go ahead.
Sorry, muted.
Okay. So we have the 100% renewable electricity by 2030 goal, which I wouldn't recommend changing. And so any of the goals that we already have in the 80 by 50 plan, unless we're making them stronger through this process, we will keep those in place, or we'll do modeling to redo them based on the overall emissions target. So we're moving from an 80 by 50 goal, and what you're recommending now is 0 emissions by 2040. So clearly we are going to have to do additional modeling and looking at a lot of different aspects of the work to see how we're going to get there. So we have buildings, transportation, renewables covered with the goals. And then there is the recommendation to do the emissions, consumption-based emissions inventory in the next year is one of the recommendations. And then that would fill in the consumption-based strategies more. I think that the waste reduction strategies are actually in the sustainability category. We had originally been conceptualizing consumption and waste underneath mitigation because we have a slightly different role to play than public works solid waste. We want to look at consumption emissions more broadly and see where those emissions are coming from, and then figure out which strategies the city should implement. And, you know, would that be under the purview of the climate office, or would that be something that the solid waste team in Dottie would do? So I think that between buildings, transportation, renewables, and consumption waste, we've covered the vast majority of emissions. And we will have to dive deeper, but it's probably going to require a lot more technical analysis for the smaller categories of emissions where we don't currently have strategies or good ways to measure them today.
Great. So we'll come back to that. Well, Frank, do you have thoughts about the path forward, given what Liz and Thomas shared?
No, that was really helpful. I just chatted was really helpful. It still seems that maybe, I think what Sunrisa was saying earlier, that placeholder language is helpful, you know, in this context.
Great. So let's talk about, sorry.
I was just going to throw in 2 placeholders, because I think we need to look at small engines, and I think we also need to look at emissions from asphalt and concrete.
Okay, let's, hold on.
We could talk about fuel switching that is not electricity. So for those, we could be talking about like biofuels or renewable natural gas or biogas. Some of those opportunities are less than others, but you know, so we have the broader strategy of electrification. Electrification isn't suitable, and so how do we fuel switch on those sides? So a placeholder for source may be a good one as well.
Great. So moving to the top, co-benefits and equity. George, not sure if this is the best way to handle your suggestion here. Pollutants, especially in low-income communities and communities of color with poor air quality. What do you think, George? That or an alternative?
That works for me.
Any other comments on that? Chime in. There's not a lot of hands coming up. Go ahead.
Jacob, are you monitoring the overall chat? I know some people are chatting me privately, but are you monitoring that, or would you like me to monitor that?
I would love for you to monitor that. Thank you.
Okay. So Veronica, you seem to be having, do you want to wait till we get there, or did Veronica and Sunrisa seem to be kind of going back and forth on some specifics they'd like? Placeholder language?
Let's come back to that. Let's go through these in turn, get these issues settled, and then we can go if they want to figure that out via chat. Does that work for folks?
Good. Yep.
Okay. So consumption-based inventory. Sorry, before I started track changes, there was this clarification. So Patty, what I was thinking is based off of Thomas's description and Liz's, I'm sure there's probably a good definition of that that's in Liz's back pocket somewhere. We can add either a footnote or just explain what scope 3 emissions are in that. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time here for that. Does that sound good, Patty?
Yeah, no, footnote sounds good.
Okay. It seems that we might want to add 100% renewable electricity by 2030, just since that's an important part of the 80 by 50 plan. Everybody comfortable with that? Okay.
Jacob, there is a question from Naomi. If we go back to the co-benefits and equity, there's a question about where did the discussion land on frontline communities?
Sure. I don't know that I fully have the answer to that. Frontline communities stayed in the overarching goal, and we do have a footnote that we'll need to continue to work on. If folks remember during the first meeting, there was a lot of discussion in one of the groups around what are those vulnerable communities, and so that was outlined pretty well from homeless communities, communities of color, low income, health compromised individuals, pregnant moms, etc. So we were thinking, so what we did in the meetings in a box for that is you saw that footnote for those of you who had looked into that, that essentially carried that conversation, older adults were in there, from meeting 1 into the meetings in a box to define frontline communities. I don't know if that helps, but that's where we're at with that right now.
It does, she says.
Okay. Great. So then moving down to buildings, we have a suggestion to have something along the lines of by 2025 and have an inventory of the types of communities, buildings, and retrofits. I added communities in here. I'm not sure that that gets to the comment around equity that was part of that, needed, paired with a strategy to tackle these. I'd love some additional thoughts on this one, how to craft this. Thoughts?
Is that I guess a inventory of the building stock and what the necessary retrofits would be to get to 0 emissions?
Jacob, you mind if this is John? Can I speak up?
Please.
Sorry, I didn't have my hand up. I think that one of the first steps would be to meet with a variety of different BIDs in the city, because they're going to be working directly with commercial property owners, and start to go through and categorize the types of buildings. So there's obviously sort of historic buildings or registered buildings, different types of construction methods, and different types of mechanical systems. So the first would be to sort of create a category or a group of categories for the building types. And then I think that it would be some form of a task force that would go through and evaluate the kinds of renovations that would be needed for each category in order to get to net zero, so that we can understand sort of the steps that are needed for each of those categories. And then I think there would probably be a third step, which would be some cost estimating about what kind of costs we're talking about to make those retrofits, because they'll be very different based on the building types. And then I guess there's a fourth element, which would be to explore how do we make those how do we attack those costs? And if there are certain building types that are incredibly expensive, is there a different way to approach that? There are going to be historic buildings or certain municipal buildings or large convention center type buildings that will be very, very difficult to get to a net zero. And so trying to identify those ones that may not be possible to get to net zero.
Right. So I think it's clear that's a lot of the strategy for how this would be implemented. And what we need here is what I would say is an outcome. This is all probably going to be pretty or this specific one is definitely a strategy. And I want to be clear, an outcome is a population impact or result that we're looking for, as opposed to the how we're going to implement something. So there is a little bit of a mix here. I'm not going to be a super stickler for outcome, but at the same time, I don't think we want that level of detail. That needs to be in an implementation plan, if that makes sense, John. But we do need something here, have a plan in place. And the piece that I heard was sort of missed is there's the types of buildings, but also perhaps going back to targeted universalism, how are we not having one size fits all and supporting communities and those let's just say frontline communities who are likely going to struggle with these transitions the most.
And just to provide a little context on this piece in particular on existing buildings. So Jan is a member of the team in the climate office, and he has been tasked with creating a strategic electrification plan. Sometimes it's called beneficial electrification. Basically, we understand that everything can't be electrified. There might be some building types or uses that that's not appropriate. But we're in the process of hiring, bringing on a consultant and launching a planning process that would do modeling of all the building types in Denver, all the main building types. So basically exactly what John just described is what we're about to embark on for the next year plus. So we will absolutely be doing that. I think what would be great here would be some guidance around what are those outcomes that people would like to see, increasing, the livability or the health of our buildings through beneficial electrification, or, centering people or households who are most impacted by the negative effects of, emissions from, combustion equipment in those properties. So I think some outcomes around equity in this space, and some outcomes around kind of what would it look like if we were to electrify buildings strategically, what would be the benefits of that, would be really helpful to kind of guide that planning process.
Mm-hmm. So Liz, do you have a thought? I think this generated that we have a 2040 long-term outcome, and it seems like we should have something in 2025 so that starts to get underway, progress toward meeting that. Is there anything from an outcomes perspective that you think should be in here that's achievable based off of the work that the office is currently doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think some interim goals around efficiency would be wonderful. We already have efficiency goals in the 80 by 50 plan that I think are pretty aggressive. So we could simply incorporate those here to kind of reinforce that those are supported. So a 2025 or a 2030 efficiency goal for different sectors, commercial, residential, would be great. I think some interim goals around equity would be really helpful. So identifying, by 2025, we will have supports in place for buildings that, or, residences that have the highest negative impacts from, indoor air quality issues related to internal combustion equipment. I don't know that that was a great description, but I think something in that space would be really helpful.
So what I would suggest then, if people are comfortable, is that we carry forward. Liz indicated these are pretty aggressive in terms of efficiency goals from the 80 by 50 plan, and then maybe we have something around equity instead of a strategy where we're saying we need a plan. Not that that's always a bad thing to put in an outcome, but these are more population level impacts. Thoughts about that? Is there comfort with that, John?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that maybe we put a goal in here that by 2025 that we identify some financing tools for folks that potentially can't afford to implement some of the retrofits. So for example, if there's an identified retrofit that has a 2 or 5 year payback, a lot of commercial property owners and other folks might be able to afford to do that and just justify it on the payback, but some people will not be able to. And so I think that, to be able to identify some form of a financing tool that allows for people to implement those retrofits that do have a payback period.
And would that be just around indoor air quality, or it sounds like you're saying more broadly?
I'm saying more broadly, I think that it relates to, I mean, we're talking about like electrifying buildings. There may be a cost savings of doing that. There's also ways that you can retrofit buildings to make them more energy efficient. And there's a payback, a pretty, trackable payback period. But it also requires an upfront investment. And some people may not be able to afford that. And so trying to find financing tools that would allow for people to make those investments in their building.
So how about this then? By 2025, have financial and other supports in place for frontline communities to address efficiency, electrification, and poor indoor air quality.
Perfect.
Okay, we got the perfect from John. Liz is, I think, nodding a little bit, but has some additional thoughts, if I'm reading that right.
I just want to make sure that we're not getting too tactical. That's all. This really needs to be goals and outcomes based, because I also think we can't assume we know what's going to work for those communities. And so the strategies and tactics, we can look at best practices from other places. We can sort of have some ideas, but I think those also need to evolve over time as we work in community. So in particular, I think just, I don't know about financing. I don't know if financing is the right tool for everyone. I think it might work for some and not for others. But financial and other supports, I think, is broad enough. But I'm still not sure that this is an outcome.
It's not. It's a strategy, but the outcome would be, X percent of frontline communities X percent of people or frontline communities, or however we want to define it, have implemented efficiency, electrification, and poor indoor air quality measures or something like that. I don't know how we measure that, but that would be, or, X percent of homes in frontline communities or something like that.
Patty has her hand up. Jacob.
Patty, thank you.
I was just going to suggest, because finance aspects are going to impact all of our overall goals, that that some of that exploration and modification, perhaps we could just have an eye when we go through all of that, rather than, because I do think that all of these, in terms of impacts on the city, we should try and figure out what are some of those federal and other, alternatives and entities in communities that can help with that. But I don't want to get into that, because I hear what Liz was saying in terms of what we're trying to do right now, which is pretty immense, focusing on the goals.
Yeah. So what I would suggest, given the time, is if there's broad agreement that we want to turn this into some type of outcome, that we can do that electronically with Liz and others. Does that work for folks for that piece of it?
Veronica has a comment.
Yeah, Veronica.
Yeah, just kind of what you're saying, bringing it back to a goal, just looking at goal number A, which you kind of split up, by 2025, have incentives and programs for residential communities, trying to just keep that language similar instead of, just focusing on the buildings. The next one would focus on those frontline communities. And again, then we're not looking into the strategies, we're just making sure that there is an incentive program and supports there. And, whether that be 50% of residential, frontline residential communities, whatever that may be. But we also kind of mirror it as that conversation moves forward.
Great. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay. So as these conversations have been going, there's a lot that we can do here. I do think that we need to talk about 50% of new vehicle registrations and whether that's too aggressive or not, per Frank's comment, and I think there were some others who were commenting on that. Get clarity on the 15 to 25%. And D also has an issue around equity. So let's work through those. Frank, do you have a suggestion for the 50% of new vehicle registrations?
I don't have a suggestion. I think, one of my struggles is that I'm separated from what the largest impacts are and how, if we were to achieve 50% of new vehicle registrations to be EV, what kind of impact does that make on our overall? So I think I have a tough time making any suggestions overall, but combined with not having it really pegged to the actual emissions themselves and where that gets us to our larger goals, it becomes even tougher for me.
Liz, can you take us out of the woods?
Sure. Sorry, I was going to suggest that I think Mike Salisbury, our EV expert, is on the line. And I think that he actually has a concern that the 50% of new vehicle registrations is actually less aggressive than the current 80 by 50 goals, because our goals are total vehicle registrations, and because only about 20,000 vehicles are sold annually in Denver. We have to actually have a lot of new vehicle sales be electric to hit those overall registration targets. Mike, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, no, thanks, Liz. That's just kind of where we're at right now with meeting the 2025 and 2030 goals. We really have to significantly ramp up, and actually, 50% of new vehicles a year only is about, maybe 12,000 vehicles per year, and we need to get to about 100,000 in 2025, or about 5,000 today. So the math is not kind to us as far as the number of vehicles we need to hit that goal. The other factor that has changed the denominator. So if we are meeting our mobility goals, that should, help take vehicles and reduce total vehicles. So that could change the equation a little bit, but it's just want to give you some sense of where we're at and how the new registration goals match up or don't match up with our existing total vehicle goals in the 80 by 50 plan.
So Mike, if you would, if you were writing this, it would be by 2025, 100,000 vehicle registrations are electric. Is that right?
Right. Well, that's our 2025 goal, more or less. So our goal is 15% of all vehicle registrations, and that comes out to about 100,000, depending on what our assumptions are about vehicle growth over the next 5 to 6 years.
I would highly recommend we use a percentage rather than an absolute number, because as Mike said, we might reduce it. So we prioritize on the climate team. I don't want folks to think like we prioritize EVs over other actions. We actually do use and agree with that sort of mobility pyramid where we're prioritizing biking, walking, transit, shared transportation, and then for the remaining vehicles on the road, we want those to be electric. But if we reduce the number of vehicle trips taken and the number of vehicles on the road, then we're doing a good job of achieving our climate goals through that mode shift strategy. And then, so I would suggest that we keep with the percentage. So if we want to be more aggressive than what's in the 80 by 50 plan, we would increase that 15%. But as Mike said, it's already a really pretty aggressive goal.
And then Mike, you said about 2030, what would the percentage be there of all vehicle registrations?
Sure, our goal is 30% by 2030 of total all vehicles.
So I think to Frank's point, how does this all influence emissions? The EV goals, I think, are already pretty aggressive. We can certainly make them more aggressive. But going back to Pete's suggestion, I do think that if we're increasing the recommendations around mode shift goals, then that gets us greater emissions reductions on that side. So we could make up some of the difference with a more aggressive approach around mode shift.
Mm-hmm.
More people, taking transit, more people biking and walking. And
Jacob, Frank has his hand up.
Frank.
Yeah, thanks. Two things. I wonder if, getting to that raw number and high percentage of EV is just like kind of a Sisyphean task of pushing a boulder up a hill, and then related to what Pete was saying, can we get to more of our overall emissions reductions through transportation? And why that resonates with me more is because it's one thing to shift the fuel source of electric vehicles, but two, there's also the issues around the sourcing of creating those batteries and for the vehicles, and the metal that goes into producing the vehicles, and also the space that vehicles consume, in our environment, and how that requires more impervious surfaces, and how there's just a kind of a snowball effect by trying to keep more and more vehicles on the road, as opposed to shifting towards public transportation and fewer vehicles on the road and more trees in our neighborhoods.
I don't think there's any conflict, especially if we're using percentages per Liz's suggestion. The question, I think, is, should we adopt what's in 80 by 50, which is 15% of all vehicle registrations are electric in 2025 and 30% in 2030, make those more aggressive, and or make it more aggressive around people using transit, moving from 15 to 25%, as has been suggested. So I'd love some discussion about this. These aren't mutually exclusive ideas. They interface with each other, of course. So it looks like
Patty.
Is Patty next?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I know we're not there, but since there is a bullet under Adaptation and Resiliency on multimodal transportation, if we could just stick it under transportation overall, since it seems relevant to what Pip had raised earlier.
Yeah, so what Patty's looking at is by 2030 transportation system, fully multimodal, physically accessible, affordable, and adaptable to changing climate emergencies. So we can organize this differently. I do think we need to make sure that it's at least aligned. Thoughts? I'm going to suggest, I forget who suggested it, maybe Thomas, 25% of people using transit. Was that your suggestion, Thomas, or someone else's?
I think it might have been Pete.
Peep, is that yours? Are people comfortable with that? That would bring us 10% greater than the current
I like it.
Goals. Okay, I heard Thomas say he likes it. So we'll do that for now, and then we'll. Okay, so that was very exciting. Apparently, we got special music for that change.
It's a monumental change.
That's right. So then the question is, are people comfortable changing this to 15% of all vehicle registrations from 50% of new vehicles? Since even though it sounds more aggressive, it's actually less aggressive.
Yeah, I think that's going to be tough to get to. I think it's pretty solid.
So then the other one, should we change by 2030, 100% of all new vehicle registrations to 30% of all vehicle registrations? Are people comfortable with that change to be in line with what Mike's been working on?
Sure.
Okay. So then we will do this. Thank you, Patty. All right, and then by 2040 or sooner, we still have emissions-free, affordable, convenient transportation system. I think that's getting also to some of Frank's pieces as well. So and then in the bike rack, which we can keep working on later, the fuel switching, not electricity. I'm wondering if, Marisol, did you say Sonrisa and someone else was going through something in here? What's going on in the chats?
I just see Frank and Liz are talking about 25%, but I'm not sure. Frank or Liz, do you guys want to chime in?
You're on mute, Liz.
Keep unmuting myself. The 25% goal I was suggesting around transit should maybe align with the way that they measure that, because I don't know if they have data for like all trips. So the mobility action plan, Alana had pointed out, it's commuting, it's commute trips. So it would be 25% of commute trips are by transit by 2030 or by 2025. So I think that they have data to be able to measure that. I don't know that they would have data to measure all trips.
Sure.
But others who know better, please chime in.
No, this is Alana. The only good data we have, which is still not perfect, is on commute trips, and otherwise requires like surveys to figure out how people are traveling. So commute trips is the most reliable.
Great. So then I would suggest if there's nothing in the bike rack issues, then we can keep working on those offline to propose something to the group rather than take time here. Does that work? I think it's important for us to get the mitigation piece nailed down. I recognize we have 12 minutes left in this meeting. So, so this has been some good work. I would like to call the question. So if you would raise your hand if you can live with what's on the mitigation long-term outcomes.
The people on the phone will not be able to raise their hands.
Yep, and then we'll ask the people on the phone if any of them can't live with it.
Mike and Thomas have not raised their hands. Oh, Thomas did.
Thomas has, Mike has not. Anybody?
I'm good with it. This is Kelly. Sorry.
Okay. Anybody else on the phone cannot live with this?
Rhiannon, Emily, Eugene, Jackie. I'm not, Michaela, Naomi.
I'm here. I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Jackie.
Veronica.
I'm still wondering. I don't know if we are still addressing how this is reducing our gas vehicles on the road. That's the only thing that's kind of like holding me back from saying yay.
Right. Got it.
So
go ahead.
I don't know
Liz.
if there's an explicit goal that we want to include there. If the percent of electric vehicles that are registered goes up, then the gas vehicle percent would go down on that side. And then if people are driving less or even giving up their car because there's frequent, affordable, reliable transit, then that would have that go down too. So I'm not sure how we would set, I mean, I guess the converse of the 15% of all vehicle registrations are electric is that there's still, 85% vehicle registrations are non-electric. Did you have a specific language that you thought might be? I feel like that there's a tactic in there or a strategy of like incentives for people to give up like the most polluting vehicles or something like that. That we could capture as maybe a strategy or tactic, like an incentive, like a cash for clunkers or something like that type of a program.
Yeah, or yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, is it a tactic or is it a goal? And I do understand, like, I could buy an electric vehicle but still have my gas car, and that, you know, I'm just wondering if.
And Veronica,
I don't want to hold up. Yeah.
By 2040 or sooner, emissions-free, affordable, convenient transportation system. That doesn't get at your concern.
Okay. Yeah,
there.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. So then we have Veronica. Any other folks who are not comfortable moving this forward?
Can I just say?
Yeah.
I think Veronica's point we should really come back to, just in the sense of, if we can encourage businesses, particularly in the center of the city, to step up participation in ride sharing programs within their businesses, that would also help, you know, the goal of the single occupancy, but it would also, I mean, I think Veronica's raising a good point about all those people who really need vehicles and whatnot. What are the ways that we can lessen or encourage businesses to cooperate in bringing
Great strategy discussion. So here's what I think. I think we had a really good discussion. We should celebrate the fact that I think we got consensus here. So we have a final draft related to mitigation. At the same time, we don't have the meeting time to spend a full hour on each of these in turn. The other ones probably will go faster. I'm going to suggest that Marisol and I, and Marisol, if you have other ideas, I'd love to hear them, but that we put this into a document, either a Google form, et cetera, with opportunity for people to add their feedback or their support, and continue to work through it electronically rather than meeting time. And then once we think that we have agreement electronically, then we can bring it back. Does that work for folks? I'm seeing some thumbs up. So I'll take that as a yes. We'll try that as much as we can. I'd like to spend the next 6 minutes for Marisol, Liz, and I to talk about the next steps and the path forward. My big piece is we definitely, because of this this shift, we need an extra meeting because this doesn't count as a full meeting and we aren't able to get to solutions. So please, if you have not filled out that survey that we sent out yesterday, identifying other options for how to get the time that we need, please fill that out. And then with that, I'll turn it over to Marisol and Liz for some of the path forward and homework and like. Marisol, you first?
Sure. My only big update is just, as you guys probably saw, we are asking to shift meetings next round 2 to online, to these types of platforms. Conference calls, whatever you need help with. I know Matt is available. The whole team here is available to help you with that. But just to be conscious of public health, we really are urging you to not in person. So that would be that shift. The other shift is all of our stakeholder advisory group meetings that were supposed to start today have also now been shifted to an online platform. We are working through some of the details of those and shifting agenda. As you guys all know, this just happened yesterday afternoon. So we are quickly trying to tweak and adjust. So we will hold the ones, for those of you that were interested, we will still hold the meetings on Monday with those two groups, but those have been shifted to virtual to a Zoom platform. And then we have pushed the other two meetings that were today and tomorrow to next week. So if you have any questions on those, please let us know, but those are in process. And we hope to still have them all next week just via this type of platform. So I think that's the biggest update from me. Liz?
Can you help us think through, Liz, how we're going to move from here to solutions at the next meeting?
So we will be sharing the summaries of all the solutions that we brainstormed in meeting 4 today, along with kind of a couple one-pagers to orient you towards some best practices and reports on sort of high impact city scale climate action. So we'd encourage you to read through those solution summaries, familiarize yourself with the ideas in there, make sure that we did capture everything that was on the sticky notes. We'll make sure that the photographs of the sticky notes are in the Google Drive. And then read those best practices one-pagers so that you can kind of orient yourself around understanding which of the solutions are likely to be high impact or which ones have already been successfully adopted, perhaps in other cities. And then for the next meeting, we will be starting to prioritize and continuing to try to sort of phase the solutions out to understand, what we would need to do to start taking on, especially some of the higher impact things that might take longer to plan for. What are the things we need to start now in the near term, and how do we move towards implementing those?
Right.
Did I capture it?
Yeah, that was great. The only thing that I would add is, in addition to impact, there's going to be a few filters in how we think through prioritization, at least at the outset, one of which will, of course, include equity, and another one sort of paired with impact is readiness to move forward, and then also sustainable economy. So that's based off of the conversation. We'll be able to do that as we organize these. Hopefully that makes sense. And any last questions in the minute we have?
Laura has her hand up. Oh wait, these might be old.
I have a question. This is Kelly.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Hello. Okay, so are we not obviously then going to do the site visits at all?
Yeah, so for site visits, we're going to need to be delaying those.
Okay. So the grow house closed.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is. Well, they're closed for renovation.
No,
they actually closed.
Yeah.
Well, the facility is closed, but their programming is going on. So they're having structural issues with their building, which forced them to abandon it, unfortunately. But they're continuing their programming out of partner sites. But yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we're reworking those in the background, and clearly now is not the time to do site visits. So we're coming up with an alternative for that. That's a great question.
Okay.
I just want to make sure these hands might all be old hands, but just want to make sure. Sam, Jennifer, Jessica, Naomi, do any of you guys actually have questions?
There is a potato and chip question. Marisol, you promised us.
How would I do this? I will have them more prepared next time, and I will show them to you at the beginning, since we know we're going to be doing this again. And I don't take up your time, I promise.
Okay.
Okay. I since it's 11:01, I want to be respectful, but I will have them out next time.
Everyone, I really appreciate your grace today as we work through how to make these meetings happen virtually. and we'll keep working on the methods and the like. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Stay healthy.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.